So good morning everyone, welcome to church. We are in the book of Matthew, and the story so far is that if you want to follow Jesus, there's probably a few negative things that you want to avoid if you can. Like murder would be one. The fact is, it's just hard to come to church and worship Jesus when you know your ex-husband's buried in the backyard. Makes things awkward. It just gets in the way, and apparently so do other things. Apparently, according to Jesus, so can anger, or sexual desires excessively, or when you constantly get tripped up by your own lies, or when you just can't move past the hatred that you feel. That stuff and stuff like it just gets in the way of you following Jesus. Now, that's not to say that the gospel doesn't have room for you to have a bad day. It does. Very few of us in this room are still working on plan A. Our story is that our best intentions in life were mocked by the cold, cruel realities of fate. And that's why the gospel is essentially an announcement that God is not on the side of those who enjoy the presence of perfection. Rather, he is on the side of those who mourn its absence. The scandal of the Christian gospel is that it is a declaration and not an instruction. Blessed are you in your loserness. Blessed are you in your can't get it togetherness. Blessed are you when it all goes wrong and when it just won't work, and when you throw up your hands in frustration and you come to the end of your self-control and everything falls apart. In that moment, blessed are you, because God loves you and his favor rests on you. This is church. This is gospel. This is Christianity, and we love it. And yet, nevertheless, we're reasonable people, and I think we all understand that there are probably some negative things that we ought to avoid if we can, because they just get in the way of us living a good life and a good Christian life. That much is obvious. What Jesus says this morning, however, is far from obvious. Having spoken about some of the bad things that can spoil our Christian life, Jesus this morning goes on and talks about some of the good things that can spoil our life as well. In that regard, he says, be careful. Okay? So here I am in church, and the preacher says, be careful. I think I know where this is probably going to go. Be careful with the company you keep. Be careful with the habits that you develop. Be careful with the things you watch on television, with the websites you look at, blah, blah, blah. Be careful, because there's all sorts of bad stuff out there that can spoil your life. But shockingly, that's not where Jesus goes. Jesus says, be careful with the good things, because the good things can spoil your life just as much. This is great news, isn't it? Yeah. So he says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So what we're talking about here is practicing righteousness, or practicing being good. Do you ever, I might be telling you too much about myself here, but do you ever, do you ever worry about being good? Do you know what I mean? Maybe this is a guy thing. Do you ever worry about whether or not you're a good man? Someone throw me a bone, thank you. Right? This is what the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about here. You have this desire inside you to be a good person, to be a better person. And he says, be careful not to practice that in front of other people. Now, practicing righteousness is probably a good thing, because if you want to get good at something, then you need to practice. Practice makes perfect. And you want to be perfect, don't you? Don't you? You want to be better. You want to be good. You want to be decent. And so in the history of the church, there are these things called spiritual practices. And as the name suggests, they are ways of intentionally making yourself better, of deliberately taking care of the health of your own soul, and they're good. And the spiritual practices that Jesus talks about here are the big ones in first century Judaism. He talks about being generous, he talks about saying your prayers, and he talks about fasting. In Jesus' world, every preacher that you ever went to listen to would talk about the benefits of these things. They would say to you, you know what? It's good to be generous. And the more you practice generosity, the more you'll begin to understand its benefits. It's good to learn how to pray. And the more you practice, the better you'll get at it, and the more you'll understand the positive effect it has on your life and the lives of your family and friends. It's good to fast. I'm not going to tell you why, it just is. But the more you practice it, the more its secrets, the more its benefits will be revealed to you. This was the language of almost every first century preacher that Jesus' audiences were familiar with. And the logic is unquestionable. If you want to be good, practice. Practice righteousness, because practice makes perfect, and you want to be perfect. So just practice. Just work hard on being better. Jesus, however, says maybe not. Maybe the more you practice at being better, the worse you become. And so he seems to say in the sentences that follow, yeah, by all means, figure out how to be generous. By all means, figure out how you can get better at praying. By all means, have a go at fasting if that's your thing. Why not? But do so in such a way that no one else knows about it. So par for the course, Jesus is being odd. He's suggesting that the God who is hidden and invisible should be followed in a way that is hidden and invisible. And so he goes on to say that generosity must be practiced in secret. That prayer is not a thing for public, it is a thing for private. It is a thing that must happen when no one else is looking. That fasting must be disguised as celebration, which of course means that the truly religious person appears to the observer as being irreligious. Good news for you. It means that the most righteous person that you know gives every impression of being utterly disinterested in being righteous. More good news for you. Such is the nature of our discussion over the next 2 or 3 weeks in church. And we'll begin this morning with the whole business of generosity. Jesus says, for example, when you give to the needy, so there's always people in your life who need something, and the Bible takes it for granted that you, as a spiritually open person, will do whatever you can to meet their need. So notice that Jesus says when and not if. In this regard, Jesus, like every other first century rabbi, assumes that you're going to want to be generous. And the reason Jesus had this assumption, and all first century Jews had this assumption, is because in their worldview, God was defined by his generosity. They believed that God was independently happy. What does that mean? But you know how you're happy, but your happiness depends on stuff.
Not always.
It depends on your relationships. It depends on how you're doing generally in life. It depends on your job, your career, your business, your health. There's stuff you have in life, and if some of that stuff falls apart or gets taken away, your happiness kind of becomes questionable. This is true for all of us. We are dependently happy. That's how it works. First century Jews, however, believed that God was independently happy. That is, they believed that God needed nothing outside of himself in order to experience an infinite, unending amount of happiness. And so when first century Jews read the bits of the Bible, like the book of Genesis, they didn't read those bits of the Bible and think, well, God must have created the world because he needed something from the world to make himself happy. Maybe he needed animals because he's into animals, or maybe he needed people because he was lonely, or maybe he needed mountains because he liked nature. There was something missing that the world fulfilled. They didn't believe that. They believed that God created the world because in his infinite happiness, it was his nature to share that, to give that, and to pass that on to his creatures. And so first century Jews would say, when you create something in life, either as a construction worker or as an artist, you're kind of like God in that moment, because it's in you to create, it's in you to build. When you're generous with someone, you're kind of tapping into godness there, because that's what God is like. He wants to give, he wants to help, he wants to rescue wherever he can. So for example, there's a great line in the Jewish book of Tobit, not the Hobbit, Tobit. It says this: better to give alms, that's the old word for being generous, than to hoard up gold. All right. Then he says, almsgiving preserves a man from death and wipes out all sin. Givers of alms will enjoy long life, but sinners and wrongdoers are their own worst enemies. So, all that to say that as far as generosity is concerned, everyone in Jesus' world is on the same page. There's no discussion, there's no argument. We all agree it's good to be generous as hard as we can, as much as we can, as often as we can. Jesus, however, says that when you practice this particular aspect of your faith, of your humanity, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honoured by others. Now, as you know, the word hypocrite is a first century Greek word for actor. And at the risk of patronising you, let me point out the obvious. It is the business of an actor to do something for a watching audience. So what Jesus is saying here is, when you are generous in life, be careful who's watching. Now, I hate to be picky here, but when Jesus implies that our generosity should be done in secret, I have a few practical questions. For example, if I give to someone, won't they know that I gave to them? No? Every year when I do my taxes, my accountant gets to see the extent or lack thereof of my generosity. I mean, this is just part of the thing we do as Christians and as humans. We're generous. So what's with this accusation of doing that for the benefit of a watching audience? What's annoying him here? In this sentence, Jesus is not talking about what you do. In this sentence, Jesus is talking about why you do what you do. And the point he makes is that if you did that good deed you did, so that people would see you do it, and then they saw you do it, mission accomplished, job done. You wanted to get noticed, you got noticed, you've nothing left to get. And so the accusation from God is quite a difficult one. The accusation is that you do that religious thing you do for some reason, but that reason has got nothing to do with me. You're putting on a show because there's some deep wound in your life that gets off on, that needs, that craves the approval of other people. And so just as an actor needs the clap of an audience, so too you need other people to think well of you. You need other people to approve of you and to say that you're okay and that you're good and decent. And you have that need, this text would suggest, because there's some sickness in your life that's never quite been healed. You think because of your religion that you're well, but you're not. The gospel, remember, begins, at least in the Sermon on the Mount, with a beautiful affirmation that God is already on your side. Blessed are you in your loserness. Blessed are you when you fail. Blessed are you when it all falls apart. Blessed are you when you can't get it together. Blessed are you who are poor in spirit, who've reached rock bottom in that horrible moment of life. God blesses you. His approval already rests on you. And the unhealed wound in your religion is that you need to go through the short years of your life searching for the approval that God has already given you. Waiting for other people to say that you measure up, that you're good enough, that you're worth something. You need those trumpets. You crave those trumpets. You need their respect and admiration, because the horrible truth is that without it you have no worth. This is the wound of religion. It is your insecurity. And I mention all that because there's a word that comes up a lot in these sentences, the F word, Father. So, a few weeks ago I was talking with my son, and I wanted him to go somewhere with me. And he said he would go, but I could tell that he didn't really want to. And I got the feeling that he was agreeing to do what I wanted just to keep me happy. And that's the last thing I would ever want as a father. And so for me this was a teaching opportunity, I guess. At the time we were having this conversation at the kitchen table. We were playing Connect 4. We started playing that now because he started to beat me at chess. And that was a low moment in my life, let me tell you. So we're playing Connect 4, we were having cookies and milk and all that. And so I took his milk glass and I filled it up to the top, I mean the very top. So much to the top that there's actually a little bit above the rim of the glass. So full that that when you touch the glass it starts to spill over. And I say that thing, do you think I can get any more milk in the glass? And he's like, Dad, I beat you at chess. I think I know the answer to that question. But I wanted to use this as an opportunity to explain to him that my love for him as father is like this. I already love him. I love him fully and completely. I can't love him any more than I already love him. And there's nothing that he can do that will make me love him more than I already do. And I wanted him to know that, because as his father, it's important for me to make sure that he doesn't go through his life, not even for a single day, trying to earn something that he's already got. Right? And there is an aspect to many of our practices of religion, our feelings about religion, our feelings towards God, that just don't get that. If you get the gospel, I mean really get it. Not the polite BS you heard as a kid, but really get the scandal of it. That God already approves of you when it all falls apart, when it all stops working, as you are, right here, right now, that He already approves of you, and that His blessing is already on you, and that His love is already on you. If you really get that, then you don't need to go through life looking for approval, because you've already got it. You can live out of who you already are, not who you feel you're not. Jesus goes on, he says, when you give in order to be honoured by others, you have already received your reward in full. So in the ancient world, the idea of the benefactor was important. You know how when you go into, like, I think we have a photo of a museum here, And most big fancy buildings have a wall like this, just past the front door. There's one in the Caledon Wellness Centre, you may have noticed it. So when you walk in the big fancy building and you wonder who paid for the building, well, you don't have to wonder for long, because their names are right there for everyone to see. And you even get to know who the big givers are and who gave the most and all that stuff. In Jesus' Jewish context, the people who gave the most to the synagogue got to sit up front, closest to the rabbi, so that everyone would know who they were. In Scotland, this is before my time, but families used to buy pews in church. And the more you gave, the closer your pew was to the front. And you weren't allowed to sit in their pew. There was a brass plaque and everything. And even in the ancient world, people recognized this as a sickness. There's a 2nd century Jewish text that says this: "Into the chamber of secrets the devout give their gifts, and the poor received from that also in secret." It sounds like a line from J.K. Rowling, but it's ancient Jewish spirituality. Don't be an idiot with your generosity. Don't use it to feed your own insecurity. This text would say to us, I think in a difficult way, because I think we're all slightly insecure. I think we need other people to think well of us, to approve of us. This text would say to us, will you just look at the milk glass? Just look at it. You should be so secure in what God thinks of you that not only do you not have to announce your spirituality to other people, you don't even have to announce it to yourself. Look at what he says next. But when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be a secret. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Does that make any sense to you? It sounds like something Yoda would say, not Jesus. I mean, if I'm being generous with you, I'm aware that I'm being generous with you. But the point here is that I should not be too aware. I shouldn't think too much about what I'm doing, about how kind I'm being. I shouldn't waste a second of my life wondering about whether or not I'm a good man. I should just be, and be happy, and be content, and not overthink any of it. And he says, you are able to be this way because your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Have a look at this next sentence. It comes from a bit later in the story. Jesus says, if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, I tell you the truth, he will not lose his reward. What this sentence is saying is that God loves you. God is watching you all the time in a nice way, not a creepy way, not a judgy way. He just looks at you as someone he loves. And even the tiny details of your life that you forget, that you haven't paused to take notice of, God notices. And he's like, yes, I'm with you. And that was a good thing you did. Do you remember when you first learned to ride a bike? Do you remember the things they said to you when you first sat on the seat? Things that with hindsight seemed rather obvious, like, hold on, keep pedaling, don't fall off. Lots of learning is like this. When you first learned to cook, it was like this. Taste before you serve. I'm not teaching anyone anything here. Heat the pan up before you put the steak in. Things like that. That's how learning is. You start out with things that are basic and elementary, and after a short period of time they become second nature to you. So that you don't have to think about it. So consequently, when you go cycling this afternoon, if you do, there isn't this internal conversation in your head that says, gotta hold on, gotta hold on, gotta hold on, gotta hold on. Keep pedaling, keep pedaling, keep pedaling, don't fall off, don't fall off. You don't think that way because it's just second nature to you. Have a look at this next sentence. It comes from a part of the Bible where God says what he's going to do in the life of his people. The kind of religion he's going to give them. I will put my law in their minds and I will write it in their hearts. I'll be their God, they'll be my people. There won't be an overthinking. There won't be this constant internal questioning. Am I doing it right? Am I good enough? Am I a good man? Am I a good woman? How's it all going? None of that will exist. I'll just be, and I'll be happy. I'll bet that the most generous people you know don't know that they're generous. I bet they never even stop to think about it, because it's just so internalized, it's natural to them. They don't know, and they don't even care. They just are. Towards the end of the story, Jesus speaks about the last judgment. And, there's the story, a guy walks up to the pearly gates, and he hears the guy at the pearly gates say, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." And the guy apparently was as confused by that offer as you would be. It's like, really? I was expecting a kind of hotter reception, to be honest. Because I've always struggled about whether or not I'm a good man or a bad man. I've always had this difficult internal conversation about whether or not I was good enough. Jesus says, "Whoa, I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." In other words, there was a time I was needy and you were generous. Then the good person who didn't know he was a good person will say to Jesus, "When did we see you hungry? When did we give you something to drink? When did we visit you? When did we help you? When did we do anything good in our lives?" This is a classic gospel twist. And I hope it's a twist that you find comfortable in your own difficult internal conversations. The good often do not know that they are good. The good often do not know that they are good. In fact, they often feel the reverse. It's a constant struggle. But God knows, and it seems He does not forget. Any questions? Good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I know I am, but probably you. Not sure about anyone else. So here's the really difficult thing about Christianity. The thing about Christianity that's difficult to accept. We come to church and we're expected to be shouted at, in a sense. We expect to be told, here's how you should be, here's what you're not, you're bad, go out there and start being good. Right? Try harder. Try harder. Stop being an idiot. Try harder. Pull up your religious socks. Try harder. This is our default position underneath any religious teaching. The scandal of the gospel is that it seems to bypass all of that. It comes to people as sinners and says, blessed are you. Blessed are you now. Not in 6 months when you get it together. Not when you stop doing what you shouldn't be doing and start being gooder. And fix your grammar and all that. But now, right here, in your can't get it togetherness, in your loserness, in your brokenness, God approves of you right here, right now. Remember what Jesus said. I didn't come for the healthy, I came for the sick. I didn't come for the good, I came for the bad. Is this a gospel twist? Does this mean if we're good, that's bad news? Good question. Thank you for coming. God bless you. See you next time.